Okay, welcome back everyone. Today we're going to extend surface area a little bit further and we're going to talk about the surface area of composite shapes. In this case, we have a composite shape in front of us, and a composite shape is anytime two or more solids come together to form a new solid. So in this case, we have a cone that is sitting on top of a cylinder. And when that happens, what happens to some of the surface area of the shape is it disappears. So in the case of a cone on top of a cylinder, we're going to lose the circular base of the cone and the base that is on top of the cylinder. So we're going to lose this part that I'm highlighting in pink right here. We're going to lose everything that's inside there because it becomes inside the shape instead of part of the surface of the shape. Okay, so what does that mean for finding the surface area? Well, what it means is we're going to use the formulas that we normally use, but we're not going to use the whole formula because we're only going to need parts of the formula. So for the cone, if we think about a cone, the surface area of a cone is found by taking pi r squared for that circular base, and then adding pi r times the slant height for the sides of the cone, or that triangular shape that has the curved edge. Well, I just told you that we don't need the circular base, so what we could do is we could just say, hey, I don't need that circular base, so I'm just going to X that off. The only thing I need to do is multiply pi times the radius times the slant height. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So for pi, I want to use 3.14. So I'm going to say 3.14 times the radius times the slant height. Okay, so if I do 3.14 times 7 times 11, I end up with 241.78 inches squared. Okay, so the area that I'm only concerned about with the cone is that side, and it's 241.78 inches squared. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is look at the cylinder. So if I think about a cylinder, the formula for the surface area of a cylinder is the circumference times the height plus 2 pi r squared. And it's 2 pi r squared because we have two circular bases, one on the top and one on the bottom. But if you remember, I said earlier that we don't want one of the circular bases. We don't want the circular base that's on the top because it became part of the inside of the shape. So what I can do to my formula, very simple fix here, is just cross off the 2 that's in front of the pi r squared. So now instead of having 2 circles in my formula, I just have 1 circle in my formula. So now I can go ahead and do that. I can plug in what I need. So circumference, remember, circumference is pi d. So we have 3.14 times 14 times 13 plus 3.14 times 7 squared. If we simplify all that, we should get 725.34 inches squared. Okay, so that is the surface area of the parts of the cylinder that we need. And if we want to know the entire surface area of the whole composite shape, we simply just add those two surface areas together. So the total surface area of the composite shape is 967.12 inches squared. Okay, so this composite shape is a little bit different. It's not made up of familiar shapes that we can look at and say like a cone or a cylinder or a pyramid or something like that. So what we have to do is we have to approach this one a little bit differently. We have to just look at the different faces of the shape. And what we can do is draw the different faces of the shape so we can keep track of the area of each one. So you can see I've drawn the 6 different faces of this shape. Now you might be saying, hey, wait a minute, there's only 5. There's front, back, right, left, bottom, top. Well, you have to remember that the front and the back is made up of two shapes, right? So we have to multiply this one by 2 when we're done. So the thing I want to start with is, let's start with the bottom since it's really kind of the simplest one. And I'm going to highlight the bottom. And right here is the bottom of the shape. I'm going to highlight it in pink. So I'm going to highlight this one in pink over here. And then I'm going to highlight the left side with green. Okay, so we can see I'm getting the left side is green. And then let's do the right side orange. So the right side is a little bit different because if we look at this shape from the right-hand side, we don't see that little step. All we see are two squares. We see one square here and one square here. So these two squares represent the right-hand side. And then similarly, the top is the same way, where if we're looking straight down on this shape, instead of looking at it at the angle that we're looking at it now, we see the top as two squares. So we see one square here and one square here, which we can translate to here and here. Okay, now the front is already shaded in gray, so let's go ahead and just use gray to shade that. It's the L-shaped one, so I'm going to go ahead and shade this whole thing as gray. All right, so now the next thing we need to do is, now that we know what's what, we need to start to translate some measurements to each one of these shapes. So if we start with the bottom, if we look at the pink shape on the bottom, we can see that it's 10 across and it's 5 deep. So we can say that's, it doesn't matter how we write it, but I generally start with the small numbers. So I'm going to say this one is 5 by 10. Okay, and then let's go to the left. Well, the left is the same way because it's 10 tall in this case and it's 5 deep, so it's 5 by 10. And then the right and the top are very similar. So if we look at the right side, we have a square on the bottom that's 5 by 5. And then if we look at the top square, it's also 5 by 5 because the whole shape is 10 tall. So if one of the squares is 5 tall, the other one has to be 5 tall. So these are 5 by 5 and 5 by 5. All right, and then the top, basically the same way because it's 10 wide and it's 5 deep. We know that it's 5 by 5 and 5 by 5. Okay, so each one of these shapes ends up being exactly the same. Because if we think about 5 by 5 and 5 by 5 and the right side and the top stacked together, well, that ends up just being 5 by 10. Well, 5 by 10 is 50. So we know that each one of these is 50. And I'm not saying the units, I probably should. It's 50 inches squared. And then the front and back are an L shape, which is kind of hard to figure out. We don't have a formula for anything that's L-shaped, but what we can do is we can take that shape and we can divide it into two different parts. Let's draw a line straight down here. So when we do that, what we do is we create a shape that is 5 by 10 on one side and 5 by 5 on the other side. And 5 by 10 was 50, 5 by 5 is 25, but we have to remember that there are two of those, so we have to multiply that by 2. So this ends up being 75 times 2. So for the front and back, we have 75 times 2, which is 150. And then for all the other faces, they're exactly the same. They're all 50, so we have 50 times 4, which is 200. And these are both inches squared. So when we add those together, we get a total surface area that is 350 inches squared.